So when I bought my Miata, my plan was to keep it stock and not put too much money into it. And even though my suspension's a little worn out, it really doesn't feel like it'd be worth to put so much money into. Whoa, Super Miata Tecnas? For my exact Miata? I mean, I guess I might as well install them if someone's just gonna leave them on the road. I got some upgraded coilovers, and I still have new wheels and tires on the way. So I'm gonna install these, but before I install these, I gotta finish up some of the maintenance on the front suspension. So I also have a bunch of ball joints and tie rod ends to fix up the front, which is all flappy right now. So I'm gonna work on that now and then get the coilovers in. Yeah, so this is the day that I actually really started becoming much more confident working on the car. At this point, I'd already spent over a week laying on the ground of my driveway, working on the car and learning how to take apart the suspension, which was one of the most daunting tasks.
I think I almost put in backwards. Yeah, almost put in backwards. Oh wow, these are stiff.
And if my expectations were true that everything would go in much easier than it came out, then I had a very concrete idea of exactly what work was left and how to go about doing it. So I got started by putting in the upper ball joints with the same press that I'd used to take the ball joints out.
Easy. Oh man, that was way too easy. Ta-da! Oh, perfect.
And I really was shocked how easy that went in. I mean, I'd spent hours on getting out some of these ball joints, like the lower ball joints, and the upper ball joint went in within like 3 minutes.
Easy.
So that felt really good, so I just kept moving along until I got stuck trying to screw that ball joint in. It was at such a weird angle that it was hard to fit the wrench in that I kept trying to move around and use different angle extensions, which is kind of hard to get the torque through something like that. But I finally managed to get it in.
Ball joint is in, and wow.
And I could feel a quite noticeable improvement in the stiffness turning the whole wheel hub. So that gave me some really good confidence that these repairs were actually going to make a nice difference. So finally I moved on to disassembling the tie rods. I tried to take these out in my last episode, and I realized that I actually need to get a specialized tool which I borrowed from AutoZone. I'd previously tried to use my adjustable wrench, but found that it wouldn't go big enough.
I have to remove everything.
So I thought I didn't really need to take out the outer tie rod, and when I tried to put that tool over it, I realized that the tool just doesn't fit over it. So to disassemble this whole thing, I would need to first remove the outer tie rod from the inner tie rod, then remove the inner tie rod from the car. And I was having trouble getting leverage to crack open this nut until I had the idea to just slip the tie rod back in to the wheel hub so that it wouldn't rotate.
Okay. Hey!
And that made the difference.
Got it.
And since this is my first time working on this stuff and I wasn't exactly sure about everything I was doing,
4.
I made sure to count the threads to see how far in the outer tie rod was screwed in, with the hopes that if I just screw in the new one the same amount, I wouldn't have to get the car realigned.
And if you're wondering why I'm replacing it, yeah, that's why.
And it turns out all of that was useless because the car was completely out of alignment by the time I was done with this. So what I'm doing here really ended up not mattering, but I stressed out about it a lot just in case it made a difference.
Wait, maybe I don't need to do this yet just because I'm gonna be taking this inner tie rod off. This is why I'm replacing this tie rod. It has moves around quite a bit.
And so finally, with the outer tie rod out, I could use the specialized inner tie rod removal tool. And the way this works is by using that C-shaped ring that fits around the tie rod, and then using this tool to grab that and rotate it. But the kit comes with a bunch of these different sizes so that you can use the one that fits most snugly on yours, and they all look almost identical, so it took me a while to find the one that was the proper fit for this tie rod. and even then it just kept falling apart, and it was quite difficult to work in the wheel well like this. But I finally got everything on. Whoa. Yeah. And it was pretty amazing how easy the work can be if you just use the right tool for the job. Hey. Got it out. I forgot to put the shock in. There's so many things happening right now. And that's when I realized that I'd already started screwing in the upper control arm before I put the shock in, which requires that control arm to be disconnected.
Aha, these are longer.
And so I need to remove that again, and while I was there I made sure that the new brake lines would solve the issue with the old ones being too short. And finally I started unpacking these coilovers. I've never worked with suspension before, or especially coilover upgrades, so it took a bit of research to figure out which goes where. Alright, my first time putting new coilovers in. And which were reversible. And it turns out on the MIATA, the front shocks are reversible. You can put them on either the left or the right, but on the back, they matter which way they're oriented.
Easy. Oh, wow. Easy.
So I had to make sure I was putting everything in right, because this is my first time and I know I'm going to mess things up. So I was trying my best to at least make sure that didn't happen too much. And then I hand tightened in the nuts on the top, as well as the control arm and the bottom of the shock. And then finally, I tightened up all the little bolts that were left to tighten up around the suspension, like the ones holding the end links and the speed sensor in.
I think I've got most of this bolted down. Yeah. I got one in. Hey.
This is a pretty big milestone. I really wasn't sure if I'd be able to do any of this, but if I could get one side all fully done, I knew that I should be able to get through the rest without much issue. So from here on out, I started really moving with a lot more confidence. And so just like the front right, I got started on the front left. So all I had to do was install the new ball joint, put the control arm in, remove both the tie rods, making sure to count the threads just in case, which it turns out didn't matter at all, and then putting the new shock in, and then finally bolting everything back in.
Hey. Alright, so, suspension.
But this one I did struggle a little bit more getting it to go in. I was a little bit worried of accidentally letting go of the shock too early before it's pushed in all the way, and have the top of the shock actually start like pushing into the body itself, damaging a little bit of that metal.
Hey. And it's in.
So I had to be really careful to make sure I put it all the way in the back, and also that I didn't sandwich my fingers in there while I was at it. But I got it in without too much of a struggle.
There we go. Extensions are your friend, I guess.
Boy, am I so glad that I bought the huge variety pack of extensions from Home Depot. That really made a difference in this car, and you'll see it especially made a difference while I was installing the rear shocks.
Alright, I do everything. Top bolts, upper control arm, shock, castellated bolt. I think I'm good. Just gotta pull this tie rod out. Four, 5, 15, 16. It came off in the 16, so 15 and a half.
And yeah, I know, before you comment, that really ended up not making much of a difference. I don't know if the aftermarket inner tie rods that I got had a different thread length or what, but the wheels had significantly bad toe out. by the time I was done with this, even though I counted the threads to be exact.
Whoa.
And then I found something interesting. The left side of my steering rack had a tabbed washer with tabs that bend over the tie rod to hold them in, which is what I read online that is pretty normal for the stuff. But the right didn't. So I'm not sure why that was, but I got started trying to pry those tabs off by hammering a screwdriver in.
I'm supposed to reach that.
And that was quite a bit of a pain just because there wasn't much room while you're working in there to swing a hammer safely without either hammering the car or my fingers. It was quite annoying how much I had to kind of like work in around there from underneath the car and then in the wheel well to get all those tabs bent out so that the tie rod could finally come out. And ta-da! I got the inner tie rod disconnected.
Whew! Did it. Got the tie rod out.
And so with the front suspension fully done with all the parts that I had with me at the time, I moved on to the rear. So I got started by installing the rear shocks, but I was so lost and focused in trying to make sure I put these in correctly that I missed that my camera was dying. So here we just cut to right after I got the rear shock in. So all I had left here was to torque it down. But don't worry, if you were worried that you missed out on me suffering trying to get these shocks in, I still got the left one to put in. So finally, to finish up the shock install, I had to tighten up the top bolts from inside the trunk, and then this happened. I got this massive pop that was pretty scary. I know that coilover is under a lot of tension too with this jack, and then it kept happening as I kept tightening it, and it was pretty scary because there's a lot of force in there. So I think what ended up happening is the threads got caught against the side of the hole, and the shock wasn't actually all the way seated at the top. So on the left side, I made sure that it was seated at the top before I really started tightening down all the bolts. And so to do that, here you can see me very awkwardly leaning over with my left hand in the wheel well, holding the shock all the way up against the top, my right arm all the way at the back of the trunk, trying to screw in the bolts behind the fuel lines.
Ow!
And then to make it worse, I banged my head really badly on the trunk. So it was a very punishing coilover to get installed.
This is how difficult it is to get to the bolts back there. You can kind of see the top of the strut is the bolts back there, what I'm trying to reach. And to reach into there, you have to get through all of these lines. And this is why I'm suffering with these, trying to get to it with the bendy extension. But this back left especially is such a pain. Like, look at the right, it's right there. So compared to that, this is a whole nother situation. The scariest thing is these tubes. Oh, fuck. These tubes, I have no clue what they are. But if I had to take one guess, oh, this is definitely the fuel. Gonna say if I had to guess, this is some sort of fuel line, and sure enough, this is where the gas cap is. So at least there's not like fuel actively flowing through here. It's just at the very top. But I don't know what that is. Maybe that is the fuel line that goes to the front because you don't need a lot at a time. But the gas tank's under here, so yeah, super fun in working near potential fuel line. Alright, cool. That one's in. Where'd it go?
So here you can see why I was suffering so much on this back left shock. My god.
That sucked.
Whew. So with the top of the coilover fully installed, I moved on to putting in the rest of the bolts for the suspension and torquing it down.
Done. Hey, the coilovers are in. Cool. Only took me like 4, 5, 6 hours.
I had got so lost in the problem solving of installing this new suspension because there were so many parts to put in. I had to put in the lower ball joints, the upper ball joints, get the tie rods disconnected, make sure I'm putting in all the bolts correctly and putting the shock in, torquing everything down. That it was kind of weird to hit a point where I realized there's nothing left and I was actually done.
And the trunk liner is back in. I attached the extender cables to the dampers so I can control the damping setting with this instead of pulling everything out again. But yeah.
And so with that, my coilovers were in. But I can't drive it yet. It still needs those new front brake lines installed and the inner tie rods, which are in the mail. But either way, this was one of the most fulfilling and smoothest days working my car, and at the same time one of the most productive. I really never thought that I would ever be in a state where I'd be working on my own car and learning how to do such major mechanical work, especially successfully, and that too on my own. So this felt really good. So in the next episode, I'm going to get those last parts in and hopefully take it on its first drive and see how much of a difference this really made. So stay tuned for that, and thank you for watching.